You won't find many instances in modern life where there is near unanimous agreement on anything. It doesn't really matter what the issue is. You're probably not going to find a consensus. There was a recent poll that supposedly showed that around a third of millennials believe the earth is flat, for example. So whatever explains this phenomenon, whether it's the internet or drug use or a large-scale mental health crisis or some combination of the three, it's hard to deny that it exists. As a country, we simply cannot agree on much. And, we weren't always like this. Not so long ago, presidential candidates like Nixon and Reagan could win 49 states. Try picturing that happening again in your lifetime. It's very hard to imagine. But despite this sea change in American politics, there are still some issues that remain uncontroversial. Not many, but they do exist. And maybe the most important point of consensus is that despite the relentless corporate propaganda to the contrary, Americans still believe that basic observable biology is indeed real. They have not fallen for the scam of gender ideology, at least not to the extent that many people assumed that they had. Specifically, 79% of Americans do not believe that men should play in women's sports. And we've talked about that poll before. It was from the New York Times recently, which is, of course, one of the main proponents of gender ideology. But even the New York Times had to admit that that Americans can see through the propaganda. According to the results, 67% of Democrats also agree that men, whether they're supposedly trans or not, should stay out of women's sports. And to put that number of context, you will not be able to get 67% of Democrats to agree that Donald Trump shouldn't be hauled before an Antifa firing squad and summarily executed without a trial. But on this issue, there's broad agreement across political parties, and that's why even Gavin Newsom is taking the side of the 67% of his own party. And that makes sense, of course, because in order to believe that men should be able to play against women in sports, you have to ignore what you can see with your own eyes. I mean, it's one thing to harass and intimidate millions of Americans into going along with the fiction that biological sex is meaningless and that men can become women in the abstract. Yes, it's an egregious lie, but it's also tempting for many Democrats to go along with it. After all, if we're just talking about words and pronouns, they might say, then what's the harm of affirming this, even if it's not true? This is the logic that many Democrats have internalized, in no small part because, in many cases, they know that they'll lose their jobs and their friendships if they don't. But it's an entirely different proposition to convince people that there's no issue with trans-identifying men playing sports against women, because for someone to go along with that particular lie, it's not enough for them to fall victim to propaganda from the Human Resources Department or their university's DEI office about how gender is supposedly malleable and meaningless. They have to go a step further than that. They have to also pretend that, high school boys soccer teams can't actually destroy the women's Olympic soccer team, even though everyone can verify that that happened. They have to ignore the obvious strength differences between men and women that they see constantly in everyday life. They have to affirm, in other words, that what they're seeing with their own eyes is in fact a lie. They have to go full 1984. And it's very difficult to get a majority of people to do that, even if they're Democrats. What's remarkable is that despite this consensus among both conservative and liberal voters, politicians in the Democrat Party continue to insist on forcing women to play against men. They've continued to ride this 80-20 issue where they are on the 20 side. They've continued to ram through their egregiously unpopular agenda, which is something that can only happen if people don't speak up. If 80% of voters want something and their elected representatives ignore them, then we can deduce that voters are not holding the representatives accountable. They're not showing up to hearings, making their opinions known. They're not ejecting anyone from office for defying them. They're staying silent in the face of an extraordinary rejection of basic biology that everybody knows is completely insane. And that's why yesterday I flew across the country to speak at a hearing in the California State Assembly. And this hearing concerned a bill that was proposed by Republican lawmaker Bill Asaley. The bill would reverse California's current law, which allows males to compete against females from elementary levels all the way up to college, as long as the males claim that they're really women. That law's been on the books since 2013 in California, and Asaley's bill would overturn it, which again is what the majority of voters want in the country, but also in California. When it was my turn to speak, of course, I only had 2 minutes. That's why I decided to focus on the single most important aspect of this entire debate, which is actually not fairness or safety, as important as those are. Here's what I told the California Assembly. Watch. Today, I'm not going to talk about fairness, although it's certainly true that allowing men to compete in women's sports is deeply unfair. And I'm not going to talk about safety, although it's certainly true that allowing men into female sports teams and into their bathrooms is incredibly unsafe. I'll let others highlight those important points. I want to talk about something even more important and even more basic. It's the most basic thing of all. It's truth. You must keep men out of women's sports and out of their facilities for the simple reason that they are men. Men are not women. A man who claims he is a woman is still not a woman. So why shouldn't men play in women's sports? Because they aren't women. It isn't true. We should not allow men into women's sports for the same reason we shouldn't go around claiming that 2 + 2 = 7. It's just not true. It is a lie. The man who identifies as a woman is either deluded and confused, or he is a cross-dressing fetishist looking to play out his fantasies in public. In either case, the claim that he's making, the claim to womanhood, is not true. And compelling women to take part in this untruth is evil, perverse, and predatory. If you would use the force of law to compel young girls to use a changing room with a boy, you are yourselves predators. Transgenderism is a lie. It is, in fact, the most deranged lie that mankind has ever invented. In a free country, nobody should ever be forced to participate in a lie. As lawmakers, you have an obligation to the truth. It is a truth that I know you all recognize because every human who has ever lived on earth recognizes it, that men are men and women are women. It is that simple. And the question before you is just as simple. The question is this: will you side with the truth, a truth so basic that every toddler understands it, or will you disgrace yourselves by denying it? That is your choice to make. Now, after I spoke, a student who lives in Riverside, California, named Taylor Starling, testified about how her spot on the varsity cross-country team was stolen by a male student. Taylor worked very hard for her spot on the team. She lost it because of California's law. At no point did any Democrat on the committee express any sympathy for Taylor. They didn't care at all, of course. Instead, when it came time for the two Democrat witnesses to testify, they attempted to basically rebuke Taylor indirectly. So listen to these two activists and pay attention to the arguments they're making and the arguments they don't make. Listen.
For well over a decade, California has allowed transgender student athletes to compete alongside their cisgender peers and to use the restrooms and facilities that best aligned with their gender identity. These policies have been working for years. The author of AB 844 frames this bill as an effort to protect women and girls. As the mother of a 21-year-old daughter, I worry about my daughter's safety constantly. Sexual assault and violence directed at women and girls is at epidemic levels. But that threat of violence comes largely from their coaches, intimate partners, and family members. There is no credible evidence to suggest that trans students are a threat to their classmates or their teammates. And this is why anti-sexual assault and domestic violence organizations denounce bills such as this.
I'm also the proud mama bear for my daughter who is trans, and I'm here to make sure that you understand that everyone deserves to have equal access to facilities in alignment with their gender. I know we just talked a lot about sports, and the issue of sports and facilities is actually very tied together. My daughter has played soccer, baseball, roller derby, and hockey. And I have to say, I love it when she has a game or a practice. She comes home feeling grounded in her body. With her safe involvement in sports, she gets to show off the sparkly, wonderful human that she is. By contrast, in spaces where she has not felt comfortable using facilities aligned with her gender, I've seen her physically uncomfortable with stomach aches that have sometimes kept her home from school.
As you can hear, they offer a bunch of lame deflections that were geared towards the kind of testimony that Taylor Starling delivered. They implied that Taylor's emotions didn't matter because their so-called trans child was getting tummy aches when his gender wasn't affirmed at all times. Not being allowed into the girls' changing room was making his tummy hurt. That's what she just said. They suggested that trans-identifying males aren't assaulting female athletes in locker rooms. Conservatives are making a big deal out of a handful of incidents. Girls are saying they don't want to be forced to change in front of boys, and the answer from these activists is that, well, the girls shouldn't complain because the boys aren't physically assaulting them, except when they do. Those deflections are morally deranged and, to put it mildly, unconvincing. But more importantly, they do absolutely nothing whatsoever to respond to the point that I was making, which is like the fundamental point. At no point did either of these witnesses actually defend the proposition that men can become women or that boys can become girls. The mama bear with the alleged trans child didn't launch into any kind of explanation of how sex is meaningless and how, she was really the one who was on the side of truth and basic biology. Instead, she talked about how sad her son felt whenever people didn't lie to him and say that he's really a girl. This is all that trans activists have because they know their underlying position is incoherent and also massively unpopular. My point is that the fundamental claim they're making, the claim that men can be women, is false. And none of them address that point at all, as if the truth or falseness of their fundamental claim is somehow irrelevant. As if to prove my point, or to prove this point in general, prior to my testimony, a California lawmaker named Rick Chavez Zibor announced that everybody who believes in basic human biology is in fact a Nazi. So young girls who don't want to change in front of boys are morally indistinguishable from concentration camp guards, according to this maniac. He made these comments during a hearing for a similar bill, which would have banned male athletes from competing against women in high school in California. Listen to this maniac. Listen.
Really reminiscent to me of what happened in Nazi Germany in the 1930s. We are moving towards autocracy in this country. In Nazi Germany, transgender people were persecuted, barred from public life.
Mr. Gonzalez.
I appreciate my colleagues' comments, but if we could stick to the point.
This is about this. This is about this bill. They
Thank you,
were
Mr.
barred
Zibber.
from public life. They were detransitioned. They were
How is it about
imprisoned
Nazi
and
Germany?
killed in concentration camps. And the way that it started was the same kinds of things that are happening in this country by the Trump administration.
Really reminiscent. So, when this moron, when he sees a bathroom that says women, he looks at that and says, "Oh man, this reminds me of the Holocaust." Nazis weren't fans of transgenderism, he says, and therefore, if you don't believe in the lie of transgenderism, you're a Nazi. And if you're not familiar with basic logic or history, and if you have an IQ hovering around room temperature, then maybe this kind of reasoning is persuasive to you, but very quickly, it also leads you down a pretty unsustainable path. For example, you might come to believe that highways are racist because, after all, the Nazis created the Autobahn, and we wouldn't want to be like the Nazis. Therefore, you don't get to drive on the interstate. Which, come to think of it, Pete Buttigieg also says that highways are racist. So maybe we're starting to see a pattern here. Along the same lines, the Nazis banned many forms of animal experimentation. So if you think that's a good idea, well, then I got bad news for you. You're probably a Nazi. So this lawmaker is not making any kind of coherent argument, nor is he addressing the issue at hand, which is whether men should compete against women in sports. Even less is he addressing the fundamental issue underlying it, which is whether it's actually true that a man who says he's a woman really is a woman. He skips over all of that and instead accuses everybody else of being a Nazi. For his part, the chair of the committee, Chris Ward, was not much better. Here were his remarks towards the end of the hearing over the bill that we were testifying about.
It's been mentioned here that the basis for, I presume, both of these bills, but it was stated here for this bill, is that transgender women are not women, that they are men. I do not agree with that. I'm going to go back to my own exploration as I came to realize that I was gay. Because in that era, as we know in the 90s, we were told that this is not biologically possible. It is not possible, nor is it normal for a man to love a man or a woman to love a woman. And many actually still agree with that here today as well. And we fought long and hard for the rights that we've gotten there, some of which are under threat today. Now, kind of flipping the coin on its head, under this bill, a transgender boy would be forced to change in a girl's locker room, even though they might have a facial hair, they might very much express or look like a boy, and how uncomfortable might that be to girls who are in that locker room?
So you hear his little spiel there. Now, throughout this entire hearing, the Democrats on the committee, including Chris Ward, refused to ask me any questions, nor did they ask Taylor or anyone else any questions. Instead, during the question period, they gave little speeches like this one, accusing those of us on Team Sanity of being Nazis and bigots. His bit there about there's been claims that trans women are not women. That's directly in response to what I said. In fact, he's looking right at me. But making sure to not frame it as a question, because then I'd have a chance to respond. He didn't want to give any of us a chance to actually respond. They certainly didn't want to give, say, Taylor Starling also a chance to talk and to elaborate. I would have liked to see, Chavez say to give Taylor, the young girl who, doesn't want boys in a locker room with her or on her team, give her a chance to respond to his claim that she's apparently a Nazi, but there was no opportunity for that. And that all culminated in this moment when the assemblyman running the hearing looked right at me and claimed that trans women are indistinguishable from actual women, but would not allow any discussion of that point. Instead, he invokes the gay rights movement and comes up with a hypothetical about a tomboy in a girl's locker room and then moves on. Of course, it's not a remotely relevant hypothetical. It's pretty obvious that women would much rather have an actual girl in their locker room, regardless of what the girl looks like. Like, no woman has a problem with that. Even if there's a tomboy or a more masculine-looking woman, that's not the issue. You'd much prefer that over a man who gains access to the locker room simply by claiming that he's a woman. Girls would also much rather compete against an actual girl, even if that girl somehow has facial hair, as he says. And the gay rights comparison makes even less sense. Because the point is that a trans-identified male is not actually a woman. Claims to be a woman, but he isn't. We are denying the fundamental claim of transgenderism. On the other hand, nobody denies that gay people exist. Now, what some of us, including myself, do deny is that quote-unquote gay marriage can exist. But homosexuality itself is a thing. I mean, that exists. Transgenderism is not. Transgenderism is an ideological claim that we reject. Now, the reason these lawmakers didn't engage with me or any of us in any way is that they know that they're on the losing side and on the indefensible side. They're on the side of total incoherence, and everyone who was in that room could see it immediately. Which is why one thing I noticed, and anyone else who watched this could notice, is that as each member of the public came up to voice their approval or opposition to the bill, in almost every case, you knew where they stood before they said anything. And this is the way they do it in California, apparently. You have the hearing, and then and then however many members of the public want to come up and voice approval or opposition are allowed to do so. In this case, there were many. It was a very long line. There were probably over 100 people. And so you're kind of looking at this line, and it was actually kind of a fun game to play in your head before each person spoke to guess what their position was going to be just by looking at them. And I was playing this game in my head, and I was right probably 95% of the time. Because it was pretty simple. If a person looked normal and healthy, they looked like the kind of person you wouldn't mind sitting next to on the subway, they were in almost every case on our side. If they looked like the kind of people that you would rather stand than sit next to, they were almost in every case on the other side. So here's a few clips just to show you what I'm talking about. Here's what the opponents of this bill, the pro-trans side, look like. Watch.
Ari Critch-Brenton, niece of a cisgender woman who had male characteristics and was cruelly denied the women's room throughout her too short life. I oppose this bill.
Hi, Eve Banas, representing the Sacramento LGBT Community Center in strong opposition.
Hello, I am Lilac Hildreth, and I'm a college student and former student athlete. I oppose this bill.
My name is Catalina Zambrano. I'm an out and proud trans woman. I'm the executive director of Cal Pride Valle Central, and I'm in strong oppose this bill.
Hello, my name is Catherine Darrow. As an out and proud trans woman on behalf of the trans youth and of Sacramento and California, I vehemently oppose this bill. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sophia Usher. On behalf of the trans youth of California and Sacramento, I strongly oppose this bill.
My name's Dean Wild, and I strongly oppose this bill. Segregation is wrong, and we shouldn't have to say this in 2025.
My name is Alex Judd, and as a non-binary resident of Citrus Heights, I strongly oppose this bill. My name is Jenny Antsier, and I'm a voter from Rancho Cordova, and I'm here to adamantly oppose AB 844.
Hello, my name is Jocelyn Wagner. I am with Bay Area Derby. I am a trans athlete, and I strongly oppose this bill.
My name is Tiffany Thompson. I remain the mother of the slowest girl on her track team, my trans daughter. On behalf of her, her peers, and Sacramento Rainbow Kids, I strongly oppose this vitriolic bill.
Hello, my name is Christina Lee. I'm a California voter, and I strongly oppose this bill.
Thank you.
On behalf of my trans elders and my queer community and the people who are here and occupy this on this stolen land long before you ever were, you get to decide whether or not you want to be here doing the work that we are doing.
Thank you. A position,
or you end
please.
up having to, be on the wrong side. I mean, it's just
Okay. I'll take that as a position of opposition.
So you see how easy this game was. It wasn't, like I said, it was a fun game, but after a while it's not fun because they make it so easy to guess who's going to be on what side. I was waiting for someone to throw us for a loop, maybe one person to get up there with a face mask and then be in support of the bill, but that didn't happen. Just to reiterate, in case you missed it, here was one of the opponents of the bill that we just showed. This is, if you can't see it because you're listening to the audio, that's a person decked out in a full mask and face shield in April of 2025. And this was not unusual. Without exception, every single person who wore a COVID mask this hearing ended up announcing that they were opposed to the bill. In fact, every single person who looked like a patient who just escaped from an asylum, when they got up to the podium, came out against the bill. And by contrast, here, we'll just show like a quick clip of this, but here's what the supporters of the bill, meaning the sane people, the people that want to segregate sports by sex and locker rooms, here's what they look like. And there were quite a few of them who showed up, but just a few here.
Hello, my name is Sarai McCullough, and I am also a Young Women for America ambassador and former multi-world champion in martial arts, and I played for over 10 years, and I am in strong support of this bill.
Hello, my name is Natalie Mendes. I am from Young Women for America as well, and I played basketball, softball, and golf in high school, and I am in strong support of this bill.
Hello, Mark Escobel, Dad Talk Today, and National Family Justice. I would just like to back up both the claims here by my gentleman Assaili and Matt Walsh. They are 100% correct.
My name is Mariam. I'm here on behalf of Women Are Real and CAUSE, Californians for Sex-Based Evidence in Policy and Law. Males can never be females. I'm in full support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Emmett Adams. I am 18 years old. I am a newly registered Democrat. I am a gay man, and according to Assemblymember Rick Chavez, I am also a Nazi because I support this bill.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jean Chadbourne. I'm from Oakland, California. I'm a lifelong Democrat.
Everyone that just looked like a normal person, they were all in favor of the bill. And I'm not pointing out the differences here in order to get laughs or make a cheap point or just to mock these people, although that is also fun. This is not just an incidental observation. The point is that the dividing line in our culture is increasingly a line between normal people and people who despise normalcy. Ironically, at one point, one of the members of the public went up to the microphone and took a shot at me. He pointed in my direction and said that he didn't realize the circus was in town. I'm supposed to be the circus, apparently. But as he made that comment, there was an entire line of circus clowns behind him, and they were all on his side. Cross-dressers, hypochondriacs in face shields, bearded women, all on his side. Yet the circus, in his mind, is all the normal, well-adjusted families who don't want their daughters to be forced to change in front of boys. These people are so bizarre, so abnormal, that they see normal as abnormal. They hate normalcy, and that, again, is the dividing line. Now, fortunately, contrary to what you may have heard or assumed, the normal side is actually pretty well represented in California. A huge number of people showed up in favor of the bills. And from talking to some of the lawmakers and staffers, they tell me that California voters are pretty firmly in their camp on this issue. It's an 80-20 issue in California also, just as it is across the country. But at the moment, this consensus is not reflected in their state assembly, which is why both bills to resegregate sports based on sex were voted down 6-2 yesterday. The Democrats won't even let the bills make it to the floor for a full debate. And as a result, in California, males will continue to compete against females, even though no one, including the state's government, can explain why that makes sense. As a result, the Trump administration, which is already investigating the state of California for violating federal law in this area, should terminate funding to the state's education department. That's roughly $15 billion in funding. The state is openly defying both the federal government and its own voters, and there should be consequences for that. And in the meantime, more voters in California and every other state that with a demented legislation that forces women to compete against men should attend hearings like this one. And if that happens, then very quickly, these cowards will realize that they're not anywhere near as powerful as they think they are. And this could not be more important or more urgent than it is. Acknowledging the truth is the basic prerequisite for a functioning society. But the leadership of the state of California, along with several other states, has established that they're not concerned with the truth or even with what their voters want. They're committed to a path that will lead inevitably to absurdity, authoritarianism, and ultimately destruction. And yesterday we made our position very clear on that point. The Democrats plugged their ears and pretended they couldn't hear us. So we'll keep going until sanity reigns supreme again. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.